In this lesson, we're going to talk about one type of software. Specifically, we're going to talk about operating systems. First, let's define an operating system. It's the software that includes the step-by-step instructions that control all the functions of the computer. It allows the computer to carry out its task. It is the most important piece of software. Without it, the computer would not work. And many times, it's common to refer to a certain computer type or platform by the operating system it uses, meaning if a computer is running Microsoft Windows, it's often referred to as a Windows platform. And we're going to talk about different types of software or different platforms in just a minute. The operating system's work takes place behind the scenes. It's going on and you don't realize what all's going on when that operating system is at work. And when you start your computer, there are instructions built in to the read-only memory that go out looking for the operating system. First, it'll look on any disk that's inserted into a floppy drive, and then it'll look on the system's hard drive. When it's found, when that operating system is located, it's then loaded or copied into RAM from its permanent storage. Now, we've already talked about RAM and said that anything in RAM is temporary. As soon as the power goes off, it goes away. But notice it says it's copied into RAM. So it's temporarily just a copy of it is put into RAM so that it can be accessed easily by the computer. But it is stored permanently on the computer. And so it's not taken from one place and put in the other. A copy is put into RAM. Now, this is a process that most of you have heard this term. It's called booting or booting up the computer. But that's what's going on. Booting doesn't mean just turning the computer on. There's a lot of little things that start happening behind the scenes when you actually hit the button to turn on the computer. Now, that operating system remains in RAM until the computer is turned off. Now, once it's loaded, the operating system then takes over the operation of the computer. That operating system consists of programs that enable us to work with a computer's hardware. And it allows or it includes functions that allow the CPU or that central processing unit and other control chips to operate the monitor display, the memory, the storage devices, the input and output devices during that booting up process. It's going out there and determining what's hooked to this computer, what's out, what is there, and also, what type of monitor is being used. Is there a mouse connected? If so, which is being used, those types of things. And so it just goes and identifies all these different things that are hooked to the computer as far as your input and output devices. This operating system is not just a single program, but it's thousands of little functions and programs that perform different operations. And again, they all have their purpose, and it's to control the functions of the computer and allow the computer to run. Now, back in the olden days, or in the early days of computing, when you used a computer, you were required to write the operating instructions and also any programs or instructions for manipulating the data or processing the data. And so you had people that could do this, and then the rest of us couldn't. These were the computer nerds and the computer geeks. They could do this. But in the early 70s, control program for microcomputers was developed, and it made it possible for PCs or personal computers created by different manufacturers to run the same software. So this is a brief timeline of how we or where we are today. In the late 70s, there was a person, an individual named Tim Patterson, who lived in Seattle, worked for Seattle Computer Products, and he created an operating system for PCs called 86QDOS, and this stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. Now, in 1980, IBM approached Bill Gates, and most everybody's heard that name, who's co-founder of Microsoft, and wanted an operating system for IBM PCs, personal computers. And so what Gates did, he licensed this QDOS from Patterson and renamed it MS-DOS for Microsoft DOS. So Microsoft Disk Operating System is MS-DOS, and he negotiated a deal that it was to be put on every IBM PC that was sold. And that is how Gates had a little tiny company of Microsoft, then grew into a multi-billion-dollar computer giant. Gates didn't come up with DOS. He actually licensed it from the individual who did, and then he made a deal with IBM to use it on all PCs. And the rest is history from DOS, and we're going to talk about DOS and what that is. Now we have Windows, and then of course on the other side is the Apple operating systems or Mac operating systems, and we'll talk about those too. Now, MS-DOS and other command line interfaces are operating systems in which you have to type in instructions or give commands to the operating system in order for it to work. So this is called an interface. How does the human interact with the actual operating system or computer? That's called the interface. And so with DOS, or if you're using a DOS operating system, then you have to type in commands, and this is known as a command line interface. Just look at that term. You're typing commands on a line, and this is your interaction or your interface with the computer. So when the computer boots up, the user is given a prompt, and it's usually C:\\. That's the prompt where you would type in a command. The user then types in a command. It's a string of abbreviations to tell the computer what to do. So if you're using a command line interface, this is none of the point and click and clicking on pictures. There are no pictures. You're typing in commands into the to interact with the operating system and tell the computer what to do. And so if you are using a DOS-based program or that kind of operating system, you will get this C prompt. That's what that's known as, the C prompt. The C is just indicating the drive where the operating system is held. And then you would type in a command right after that C prompt. I'm going to give you some examples in just a minute. For example, here's one, let's see, where it says C prompt and then dir, which stands for directory, so it would show you a listing of a particular directory and what's contained in it. Notice it's showing there's 6 files in this particular directory. After the introduction of the IBM PC, millions of users became familiar with using DOS and that command line interface. And so after the computer booted up and the user saw that prompt which named the drive, then the user would type in a command, as I mentioned a minute ago, and here's an example of a command that you would type in. When you had the C prompt \, you could type in copy mkt rpt, which is the name of a file, .doc, which is a word processing file, and then you type in another command that says qtr1, which is the name of another file. And what this is telling the operating system to do is copy the marketing report, that's just an abbreviation for a particular document, and copy it to the Q1. And so this, you had to do all of this, or have to, I mean DOS is still around, which would copy marketing report to quarterly report 1, where we're used to using a graphical user interface which allows us just to click, right click, copy, we copy and paste. But in order to do it in DOS, you have to tell the computer what to do by these commands. In order to open a file, a particular file, here's an example. You have to tell the computer where the file is located, and so it has to be done very specifically with your quotation marks in the right place, your colons in the right place. If not, then it doesn't work. And so exam 1, C, prompt, my documents, exams, exam 1. So to open a particular file, you had to actually give the name of the file and then where it's located. So it's located in my documents in a exam folder. There's where exam 1 would be. And as I said a second ago, if you mistype a command, you get an error message. And so you have to type it again. And sometimes it's very difficult to type with all the colons and the backslashes and the quotation marks and get them in the exact place. Also, a file name was restricted to 8 characters, and then there was a 3-letter extension on the end that gave the type of document. And so that's why up here, normally we would, if we're doing marketing report, we'd name it marketing report. But since you could only use 8 characters, you always had to abbreviate your document names, and it was rather difficult to do, to come up with new names within that were 8 characters or less. Now that was DOS, or command line interface. Now let's talk about a graphical user interface. That's another type of operating system. And this is what we're more familiar with nowadays. In '83, Apple introduced a computer that had a new kind of operating system, which is this GUI, or graphical user interface. It was more intuitive, more user-friendly, and the first line of the graphical user interface didn't succeed because it was so easy. Because you had people out there used to using computers and typing in the commands and writing the programs and everything. So they thought, this is just too easy. This cannot be right. So it didn't succeed in '83 when Apple came out with this GUI. And so, but in '84 they released the first Macintosh, or Mac, and it had this graphical user interface on it, and it became very, very popular. Now the GUI has the virtual desktop, the pull-down menus, the shortcuts, the dialog boxes, and that's what makes it more intuitive and user-friendly, that you can guess basically what's going to happen by looking at the icon. And I think I've mentioned this before, if you see a garbage can, then you know that you're probably, if you put something in there, that you're going to delete it or get rid of it. And so even the little folders, if you want to open a document, you click on the little open folder. And so that's why it was more intuitive and user-friendly. Now, just examples here. Again, particular folder. This is just a shortcut on the desktop, and the desktop is, of course, the first screen you see after you boot up the computer that's using a graphical user interface. This is the quick launch bar, so the icons will come down here and you'll have particular programs that you can click on instead of having to go and find them to open them. And this over here is referred to as the system tray. You have the start button, which all of you are familiar with. You click on it and then you get a variety of all the programs that are on your computer, and you can launch computer programs that way. Now, that was a Windows desktop, where on this screen, for those of you who are not familiar with using a Mac, this is what it looks like. It's also a graphical user interface, but it does look a little bit different. And so some people are used to using an Apple computer, and this is what they're used to seeing, where the previous screen showed a Windows platform. Now, when we talk about different things, most of you are used to, or you will become used to, all of these particular menus and dialog boxes and things, but maybe you don't use or know the correct terminology. Again, any of the icons that you're clicking on to do a specific task, these are called shortcuts. When you actually get a box to come up, for example, if you're going to print something, it doesn't necessarily always just automatically print. You'll get what is called a dialog box, and this is the dialog box, and within it you will make particular choices about your printing in this example. And also, when you get the little upside down triangle beside anything, that's called a pull down menu. And so if you click on it, a menu will appear and you can make particular choices. Now, in 85, we said it back in 83 is when Apple first came out with a graphical user interface. But in 85, Microsoft introduced Windows and its version. That's its version of the graphical user interface. And it was to be used on the IBM machines, because the Apple operating systems, or for the Macs, the graphical user interface, that's the only machines it'll work on. It's on a Mac computer. Where with the IBM computers, Windows works on the IBM and IBM compatible machines. And so in 85, Microsoft introduced Windows, and it's gone through a lot of revisions and a lot of different editions. Windows 3.1 was basically the first one that really caught on. It's nothing like it is now. Sometimes it was a little bit difficult to use, but it was wonderful compared to what we were used to using. We had Windows 95, 98, Millennium Edition, Windows 2000, Windows XP, Windows 7. We had Windows Vista in here. So all different types of editions that just add more and more capabilities with every new version that comes out. Windows also has something called Windows NT, and that's just the network version of Windows. And also Windows CE, which is used on handheld devices such as PDAs. Now, there are other operating systems out there. Now, I just wanted to show you, even though we've talked about the Apple, the operating system that works on the Apple, usually you'll see it just OS and then X is the addition, OS 8, OS 10, and you'll know that that is the operating system for a Mac or an Apple computer. Also, there's Unix, there's Linux, there's Java. Java does have a particular operating system. And so with all of these, for example, Linux is an operating system that is a Unix clone, UNIX clone. It was created by a programmer who gave Linux its name. Linux is under special copyright that allows anyone to improve it, but no one to profit from it. So this particular individual, he developed it, he programmed it, came up with it and says, hey, I own the copyright to it. You can take it, you can use it, you can improve it, but you can't profit from it. So one of the free and open source software operating systems is Linux, and you'll see an abbreviation FOSS, F-O-S-S, that just stands for Free and Open Source Software Operating Systems. Then we have, of course, I mentioned Java operating system. Look at this term multi-platform. Multi-platform software is a software product that can be used on computers using different operating systems. And so if something is deemed to be multi-platform, then that's what is meant, is that it can be used on a computer using a different operating system. So in summary, we defined an operating system, what the functions of the operating system are. We defined the interfaces, meaning command line interface versus a graphical user interface, and then just gave various examples of operating systems: Linux, Unix, Java, the two most popular being the operating system or OS for Macs or Apple computers, and then Windows.